Hello, everyone. I am very excited to be with you on our fifth installment of our video series that we're doing in response to COVID-19. I have a very, very special guest with us tonight, Dr. Charles Clements, who is a former American Medical Student Association president. I have had the opportunity to communicate with him back and forth this year, and I'm very excited to have him on to speak to you all. So before I turn it over to him for a little bit, I'm just going to give you some more background information on Dr. Clements. So Dr. Charles Clements is a public health physician and former president of Physicians for Human Rights. He served on the board of the organization since its inception in 1986. Dr. Clements represented PHR at the signing of the mine ban treaty ceremonies in 1997 in Ottawa and a week later in Oslo at the Nobel ceremonies. Clements worked as a physician in a rural area of El Salvador during their civil war, operating on victims of landmines. He chronicled his experience in a book, A Witness to War, which the American Friends Service Committee made into an Academy Award-winning documentary. Dr. Clements is currently really still active in using his voice. Like I said, he has been helpful to me, and I just want to say thank you for joining us, and thank you for continuing to support AMSA. And so I know that the American Medical Student Association members who are on and anyone else who's listening in is looking forward to hearing from you. So Dr. Clements, what I'll do is pass it over to you to talk for a few minutes, and then we'll get into our question and answer session.
Okay, thank you for the intro, Isaiah, and welcome to everyone who's out there in our virtual world today. I'm happy to answer questions, and this is not quite like any time ever in my lifetime. I mean, we have never had a national mobilization like this. I have experienced a lot of things, but nothing like this, and so I think it's a brave new world for all of us in terms of what's unfolding and how we're going to respond to it.
Certainly agree with you, Dr. Clements. And so with that being said, I'm just going to use this opportunity to jump right into our Q&A, because I know that this will allow for us to really delve into things. So the first question, Dr. Clements, is, your story is amazing. You have been through so many things. As a doctor who has been on the front lines during a time of war, what would be your advice on how to get through this time?
I think, we have to kind of put one foot in front of another, and our reaction to circumstances in life is often created by an expectation. I lived in India once, and when I got back, I'd lived in India for a full year, and when I got back to the States, I wanted to open a checking account. And I had to make, I think it was 37 decisions in opening a checking account. What color did I want on my checks? What picture did I want on my checks? What name did I want on my checks? What address did I want on my checks? Did I want my checks to open from the side or from the top? And, in India, I'd gone to and opened a bank account, and there were virtually no questions asked. And so part of the way we respond to the world is what are our expectations? And I think if we can go into this period ahead without expectations that it's going to be like anything we've experienced before, it'll help us to look at it both as an adventure and as a challenge that we can learn from and grow from and come out the other side in a new world.
I couldn't agree more. And, obviously we have some fielded questions here that we're going to get through, but sometimes, you bring up good points, and I want to ask questions on behalf of AMSA. So you talk about a new world, and I agree. Do you think that this is going to, this crisis we're going through, do you think it's going to help us potentially achieve healthcare for all?
I think it's going to take us more in that direction. I think it's going to take more than this, but I think this is going to reveal the underbelly of America when so many people have their health insurance connected to their employment, and they lose their employment. They're going to be extremely vulnerable to anything that comes along that requires medical care. So I think this will be the beginning of it, because I think it's going to reveal who's most vulnerable, and I think we're going to see in their morbidity and mortality a reflection of who we've neglected in the society and who we've held on the outside.
Certainly, I couldn't agree more, and definitely we'll ask more about that as we move through this conversation. My next question to you is, how do you feel AMSA can be most helpful during this time for students and the community at large?
Well, I think that AMSA has always been about idealism and community, and so I think it's very important that students try to maintain some sense of community throughout this experience, because it's isolating. We're all speaking from places or watching this as individuals, not as a community where we're together. So I think it's going to be very important to try to maintain community, and AMSA, can be one very good way of doing that. I also think that it will help us to um, reveal things about the healthcare system that weren't very obvious. So I think I would really encourage people to keep a diary, because I think you'll find in a year from now, when we're through some of the stress, you will have forgotten a lot of what went on. And I mention that because in the book I wrote, Witness to War, which was about my experiences as a physician in El Salvador, but also what led me to refuse to fly further missions during the Vietnam War. I kept a diary, and when I went to write the book, I would read one page from that diary, and it would bring back 50 pages of memories that were otherwise lost. And so I really encourage people to keep a diary, because you'll be wanting to tell your grandchildren about what this was like. This is a phenomenon that the world has not experienced before, and we're witnesses. Capture it, experience it, and hopefully find a way to thrive in the midst of it all.
Dr. Clements, with all due respect, and not wanting to draw comparisons to what some of us who are, we're going through this pandemic, of course, but I do want to ask, how is this time similar to what was going on during the Vietnam War, and how is this different? And do you think that our response following this will be do you think that we will be able to use what we've learned during this crisis to move forward? And I know you answered a little bit of that already when it comes to healthcare for all, but just in a broader sense.
Right. Well, the the Vietnam War was a kind of a selective mobilization. So I had gone to the Air Force Academy, and after the academy, I went to graduate school at UCLA, and there I was asked to join a business fraternity, and did so. And it was eye-opening for me, because those guys had all run out of deferments. And so some of them had gotten deferments when they got married, and then they got a deferment when they had a child. They had a deferment when they got to when they went to college, and then they got a deferment for graduate school, but they were running out. And now they were all kind of panicked about what they were going to do. Were they going to go to Sweden, or were they going to go to Canada? Were they going to burn their draft card? But, those weren't choices that poor Americans that graduated from rural high schools in Indiana or Arkansas or Texas face. Those kids were drafted because they didn't go to a university, weren't married, and they were the ones that paid the price. And so I think that what we're going to find is that the toll on certain segments of the American population in the Vietnam War was severe. So, for instance, there was a program called Operation 100,000, and the U.S. was having a very hard time meeting its draft quotas as the war became unpopular and people understood more what was going on, and they wanted to encourage more African Americans into the military, but there was an IQ barrier that was holding them back, and so they actually lowered the level of IQ required to get into the U.S. Army in this special program. Well, those young men, faced a severe challenge, because they couldn't compete at the same level with everyone else, and their casualty level in Vietnam was much higher than other recruits who weren't part of that Operation 100,000. So, that's the way the Vietnam War revealed inequities in our system and our society. And I think that we'll find that this coronavirus will have the same effect in different ways as well.
Yeah, that's very, very insightful to hear that, obviously another very tumultuous event really changed things and really highlighted inequities that we have. So, with that being said, bringing it back to the healthcare sphere, what do you think and what should young physicians, future physicians, and current physicians do more of when it comes to advocating for their patients? Obviously, AMSA talks a lot about it's very important to make sure that you're clinically competent. We know that, but also it's important to recognize health disparities, other disparities, social determinants of health, because these things, the way people live, can lead to their well-being and their health. So, how do you think physicians should orient themselves more when it comes to advocacy?
Well, I think that you can begin by telling your patients stories, and you'll have to anonymize them for HIPAA purposes, but to capture those stories and retell them is terribly important. Storytelling is a way of making change, and we also have to understand that out of great turmoil, the changes that come are sometimes permanent and often very good. So. Um, in my time in Vietnam, I was carrying around a lot of soldiers in the aircraft I flew, a C-130, um, who were in uniform and in a position, and many of them died for their country, but they weren't allowed to vote. You couldn't vote until you were 21, and we were asking them to defend their country, but weren't giving them the privilege of having a say in how their country was run. And so, eventually, but it was a real struggle throughout the war years to change that. But the 18-year-old vote emerged as a result of the Vietnam War. So I think that we're going to see a healthcare system that is more cognizant of the people who are left out, or more cognizant of the ridiculous costs that are the leading cause of personal bankruptcy for people who can't pay their medical bills.
Mhm.
I think that a lot of this will be exposed, not to the people who experience it every day because they understand it. It'll be exposed to the wealthier, more privileged people when they hear these stories and see this around them in so many ways. This is they're not going to be able to escape the reality of what's going on in this country. And I think we're going to see the worst of it in probably the next 3 weeks.
Yeah. Yeah, I unfortunately you are right about that. We're going to see it get worse here. A follow-up to physicians and those in medicine using their voices more to advocate for their patients. Do you believe that more physicians should enter the realm of politics? It's something that we are seeing more people get engaged with, and so just wanted to know what your opinion on having a physician voice in that space is. And just to continue that, we see many things that are on the ballot years after years pertain to healthcare. And unfortunately, physicians and trainees and medical students have such a low voter turnout rate. In fact, that is the reason why Dr. Perry Tsai, our president last year, started our campaign, Met Out the Vote, because he wanted to get more medical students out the vote because he saw it. And we at AMSA, of course, agree with our former president, is that is one of the final steps of advocacy. You can use your voice all you want, but you also have to put people in office who are going to hopefully fulfill what you believe in and what they said they would do. So what do you think about more physicians being in the field of politics?
Oh, I think it's essential. And it's a tough thing to do because basically you stop being a physician. And at what point in your career does that happen? So, one of my classmates in AMSA, who was very active at the time, he was head of the Legislative Affairs Committee, was John Barrasso. And John Barrasso was very interested in politics, even at that early time. Knew that I think he wanted that as an eventual destination, and went through a residency, became a physician in Wyoming, eventually ran for Congress there, and is now as the U.S. Senator from Wyoming. I think there are 16 members of Congress who are physicians all together. And given the importance of healthcare, it's the largest it now dwarfs the defense budget in this country. So there should be a lot of physicians involved in it. It's such a complex industry, and I think we need to make our voices heard in shaping it. Another reflection of this is that we can't seem to deliver to the American people what majorities of them prefer. A majority of them, a strong majority actually, prefer that abortion be legally available under certain circumstances. And yet, we have a very hard time enacting that. And I think the same is true with access and costs of healthcare, that we are kind of caught between the insurance industry, the pharmaceutical industry, and the healthcare industry itself, the hospital kind of industry itself, which is huge, and make those decisions much more than we do, I think.
Dr. Clements, you and I have had some exchanges about potentially my interest in potentially entering office, and you gave me some input on things that I could do to prepare myself. Do you have any advice for anyone who might be listening who also might have aspirations of entering the field of politics and running for any form of office?
Well, I probably don't need to say this for people in your generation, but I think it's important to say, be very careful what you tweet, be very careful what you put on Facebook, because it may follow you around for your whole professional life. And if you're intent on running for Congress, that'll be a trail that'll be either helpful or harmful. But I think probably my more serious advice isn't about Twitter or Facebook, but I went into public health quite early. I went to did my internship. I was very concerned about the war in El Salvador, and so I volunteered to work there as a physician. And I think that my advice would be is become a good physician. Do your residency, get into the field of medicine, understand what it's about, and be good at it. And I think that's very good preparation for any kind of leadership role that you may want to try to play in any kind of political body or legislative body.
Thank you. That is that input is really appreciated. So now I'm going to transition specifically to medical students. So medical students all over are concerned with what is happening. They want to get involved and be helpful. We are aware that many people are volunteering in some capacity, doing childcare service. Some are helping with testing. Some students have been asked to graduate early so that they can enter into residency and lend a helping hand sooner. There are a lot of efforts going around getting PPE, and people are trying to be helpful where they can. But medical students, by nature, they entered the field of medicine because they wanted to help people. So many of them have been sidelined, and they want to be able to help where they can. Where do you think they would be effective, and what advice do you have for medical students during this time to get involved and be helpful?
Well, and one of your earlier questions I had wanted to add to my answer, especially for those medical students who are about to graduate and become interns someplace. You may feel a little bit, at times you'll be busier than you've ever been at your life, and at other times you'll be kind of on the sidelines because you're really the new guy on the block. If there's a code running, you don't know exactly what your role is supposed to be. You'll learn that in time over your internship year. But one thing to remember, that this is a time of incredible fearfulness in the part of patients. And because of the social distancing and what's going on in ICUs and caring for these people, their loved ones who are often with them are unable to be with them. And if they're lucky, they're outside a window and they can see them, or they can. But one thing I wanted to mention was that I think all of us can contribute to decreasing the amount of fear there is by recognizing that people are fearful, and by trying to be there for them and letting them know that you're there for them. And it may be that because you can't reach out and hold their hand, that you'll have to maybe find out their relative's Facebook page or find out something. But I think we can be intermediaries between patients and their loved ones and the system as medical students, and I think as young physicians and interns and residents. And so that's one thing that I think it's important to remember right now that this is a time of tremendous fear, and your presence and your understanding and kind of being with people can help reduce that burden of fear that they carry.
Thank you.
And now back to, medical students in general. I think it's very important to find something you can do to be helpful.
Mhm.
And it doesn't matter how small that is,
Yeah.
because everything is important. A mask, if you've been able to make some mask or distribute some mask or deliver some mask,
Yeah.
each of those masks might save a life.
Yeah.
So one can never diminish the importance of gestures, no matter how big or how small they are. And the reason I say this, to find something that you can do, is because I think that one of my worst feelings as a physician and a human being has been when I've been in circumstances and felt like I was unable to help, that
Mhm.
there was nothing I could do,
Certainly.
that that I was helpless in the face of something that was terrible. And there is something we can all do, and we just have to find out what that thing is. And maybe that's doing respite care for someone who needs some time away from someone with Alzheimer's and just needs somebody to be with them for a while. Or maybe it's reading to some children who don't have anyone to read to them anymore because their parents are both maybe healthcare professionals and so busy with what they're doing. But I think we can all find something.
Yeah.
And that's something will both make a contribution, but it'll also make us feel less helpless. And I
Mhm.
think it's very important not to feel helpless in a situation like we're facing today. We have a lot of tools at our disposal as health professionals, and we should try to find ways to use them.
Certainly, and Dr. Pamela Weibel, our first guest that we had on, said something very similar. So your input again is very appreciated there. And I want us to talk about something very specific now when it comes to those of us in the healthcare field and future physicians. So we are aware that big pharma companies are trying to position themselves around COVID-19 when it comes to treatment and vaccinations, and there's conflicts of interest there. And unfortunately, we know that big pharma companies have had a history of seizing opportunities that lead to them making a profit, but not necessarily doing so in regard to trying to do better for the population. So when it comes to conflicts of interest with pharmaceutical companies, and I know you're aware of AMSA's farm-free stance, what can young physicians do to address this issue?
I think that medical students and physicians, can ask questions. And so, you mentioned, I think, that you did a rotation at Scripps. I used to evaluate students at the university where I taught down there, and they would have lunches brought in by the pharmaceutical reps that probably cost $150. I mean, the most luscious looking sandwiches I think I've ever seen, and they were brought in there every day. Another farm rep brought in those sandwiches, and I think just asking questions about why this is allowed, and isn't this a kind of subtle influence? And I think we can ask questions and ask them in a way that doesn't put anybody necessarily too much on the spot, because we have to live with those people we're asking questions with, probably. But I think asking questions can be a first important step.
Thank you. And specifically around COVID-19, do you think that there is anything that students, anybody, AMSA, and I know you said a little bit about it, should we be making our legislators aware of what the pharma companies may be doing around COVID-19, or do you think that essentially what do you think would be the best role to play in regards to COVID-19 treatment?
That's a tough question. I think it'll be kind of what I would call situational. That is, we're going to have to see what's going to unfold.
Mhm.
I just read a report today that President Trump owns some stock, I think, in the company that is making hydroxychloroquine, and another very prominent person in the cabinet has a major amount of stock in that. And we see this unproven remedy being promoted on national TV in a way that's just alarming. I think we can make the people around us aware of how alarmed we are by things like that. I'm not sure where we need to put our kind of legislative clout in the near future. I think it'll depend on how things unfold. So, for instance, right now in the relief bill, testing has been designated as free, but the hospital bills that people are running up, many of them are dying, and then their family is stuck with those bills, or if they survive, they then may face bankruptcy because they didn't have adequate insurance or any insurance at all. So I think in the continuation of the relief bill, which is going to start next week, I think we need to be advocating for people who are cared for because they had coronavirus or COVID-19. Their medical care should not be billed to them individually. I think we need to cover this as a national emergency. I think that could be a very important and near-term focus.
I certainly agree. And Dr. Clements, this next question for you is, what is your opinion on healthcare professionals being compared to being on the front line? Is the military metaphor appropriate since physicians never went into medicine as a career knowing they would possibly sacrifice their own lives to save others?
Well, I would question that premise. I mean, I think when you train to be a doctor, you are training to save lives, but saving lives is not always risk-free. We know every hospital environment is rife with bacteria and viruses.
Yes.
It's where ill people come. So I don't think that being a physician has ever been risk-free. And if people enter into the profession hoping it'll be risk-free, they might be in the wrong place.
Yep.
Now, that said, I think the analogy right now is a good one because we're asking people to go to the front lines every day and risk their lives without the equipment they need to do their job, either to protect themselves or to protect patients. And we don't send soldiers into the Gulf War without the best equipment.
Yep.
And the equipment that they need. So I think that part of the analogy is a worthwhile one and one that people can really grasp and understand, very, very quickly. And there may be healthcare professionals in New York City, New Jersey, and every place else that's, New Orleans and Florida right now that are under incredible stress, and they're saying to themselves, I didn't sign up for this. And that's true. No one signed up to be in the middle of any of the crisis that they're in right now in these hospitals. But on the other hand, it's very awkward for them to say, "Well, I'm not going to do this, or I'm going to walk out." Our obligation is to our patients and to our colleagues. And so, in a wartime situation, soldiers will often fight harder to protect the person beside them than anything else. That motivates them. And I think that's probably motivating a lot of the healthcare professionals today. So I think the war analogy is not a bad one. There may be pieces of it that don't apply, but the fact is that you never send soldiers to war without the best equipment and the equipment they need, and enough of it, and a supply line to keep them. The logistics of wars are that you have to have supply lines, as Hitler found out in Russia, or you can't continue your strategy. So I think that some of those analogies are okay.
Yeah, certainly. And Dr. Clements, I have a few more questions for you. And this next one, I am going to preface with the fact that I am not trying to put you on the spot here. And I will share with all of our listeners that AMSA is nonpartisan. We are very nonpartisan, but I do want to ask you, how do you feel about the handling of the country's response or lack thereof up until recently when it comes to COVID-19. And I'm not trying to pick on any individuals. I just want to know what your thoughts on that are, and then how you feel like in the future physicians can try to be more of an aid when it comes to us. Not hopefully we don't have to deal with it, but if we do have to deal with the pandemic, how can we be helpful if we are dealing with lack of leadership?
Well, I think history will really determine this, and we know often the victors write history for a short while until there's a broader perspective that's allowed to be written by some people on both sides of an issue. But I think that there will be no doubt that the United States has been very slow to respond to this, has been hesitant to press corporations into the service of a national emergency, has been unwilling to have a national strategy versus letting the states each develop their own policy, whether they're going to shelter in place or social distancing or whatever. I think all of these things will eventually come back to rest with the president of the United States and his cabinet and the people in that have delayed these decisions or not made them, or have done worse, have purposely downplayed the importance of this, saying, it's going to go away. It's going to go away quickly. We don't need to take this as seriously. That this is an overblown reaction. I think all of those will come back to haunt them a great deal. And I think there will be a commission eventually, like there was a commission after the assassination of President Kennedy, and after we had a commission looking into the deceptions that led us into the Gulf War. I think there will be a national bipartisan commission of some kind. It'll be described as a witch hunt at first. It may be very difficult to conduct, but eventually I think it'll come out with a record of what went wrong and why. And we need that. If we don't learn from our mistakes, we're doomed to repeat them. And so that'll be a very important process.
Certainly. And with that last statement you just made, this leads me to my last question for you this evening. If there is one thing to learn from this as a society, what would you say to that? Or what would you say that is?
Well, I think if you look at pandemics throughout history, there's a shift that takes place afterwards. Things change, and things will change as a result of this of this pandemic as well. And earlier in the day, Isaiah, I referred you to an editorial in the Financial Times,
yes,
written by Arundhati Roy. That's Arundhatiroy. And if somebody Googles that, the Financial Times will come up and say you have to subscribe to get this. But if you look, you can find it other places for free. But it's an editorial about how what we're going through is a portal to another world. And we don't know what that world is yet, but we're in the midst of that portal, and we can be aware of that and understand that it's leading us to a whole new world, and have some influence on what that world is looking like and what that world has learned from this. So I encourage students to kind of keep that portal analogy in mind and read Arundhati Roy's editorial. She's an author of a
she is.
book that won the Booker Prize, The God of Small Things. She's also a social justice activist and organizer, and someone that I think everyone would enjoy reading. I will say also that I think that students can survive this by, as the quote I said at the beginning, or a quote I mentioned to you. I was, once in the middle of the Civil War in El Salvador. The area that I worked in was bombed or rocketed or strafed daily by American supplied aircraft. Had very little medication, and the way I coped from day to day is reflected in one of my favorite quotes from the Bible, and it's also something found in the Talmud as well, and it's from it says, "Do not be daunted by the enormity of the world's grief. Do justly now, walk humbly now, love mercy now. You're not obligated to complete the work, but neither are you free to abandon it." And I think that's how we have to look at this time ahead. We have to put one foot in front of another and do what they're supposed to do, and they social distance, and we'll come out of this intact and with a new world that we've helped to forge. So I encourage people to keep that in mind. That quotation has helped me through some very difficult times, and I encourage other people to kind of take it to heart.
Dr. Clements, it has been such an honor to spend the last half hour learning from you, hearing from you. I know that everyone watching and everyone that will watch later will feel the same way, but I just want to give you a very big thank you. To our listeners who have been following us. If this is your first time listening, you can see the other videos on amsa.org/COVID19. Our next speaker will be on Thursday at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, Rosemary Eckenbarhe, who is from Affordable Insulin Now. She'll be speaking more about what's going on the pharma side and how we need to hold everybody accountable and how we need to ensure that patients are over profits for everybody. And then our national convention will be next week, and very excited for that, April 16th through the 18th. 2020. And my last thing that I'll share with you is that we will be holding our last video series session before convention on Tuesday, April 14th at 5 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. We are going to have Congresswoman Jan Schakowsky and her senior health policy advisor on with her, and I'm very excited for that. So we have 2 more great sessions for you all before convention. I hope you all take care, be safe, practice your physical distancing, and still enjoy what you can with everyone, even if it's through Zoom. Take care and have a great night.
Thanks, Isaiah. Appreciate you inviting me to participate in this.
Certainly, Dr. Clements, it is a privilege to have been on with you, and I'll be in touch with you for sure.
Okay, great. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.